My name is Nikki Hamlin, and I am an Olympian and a member of the ITA education team. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second ITA monthly educational webinar of 2023. Thank you all for joining us from wherever you are in the world. Before I introduce the topic in more detail and our panelists, please allow me to do some housekeeping. We are delivering this webinar in 6 languages. On your Zoom menu, you should see a button called Interpretation. By clicking on this icon, you can select the channel with your preferred language. I will be presenting the session in English, but you can also listen to the audio in Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, French, Russian, or Spanish. Today's webinar is part of our educational monthly series that are publicly available and designed to tackle key anti-doping topics and to raise clean sport awareness. As for all of our sessions, it goes without saying that while we encourage debate, interaction, and questions, we do not tolerate any kind of aggressive behavior or abusive or racist language. We trust you will join us in the spirit of fairness, respect, and integrity. Some other housekeeping points. Please do use the chat function to tell us a bit about yourself. So, for example, the sport you're representing or where you're from. Also, as a reminder, you can use the Q&A function to ask a question on this topic to one of our expert panelists, and we will leave some time at the end for these. Finally, a note that we record all our webinars so we can make them available on our website and YouTube channel for those who are not able to attend the live session. As always, it is my pleasure to give a shout out to our official presenting partner, Inform Sport. Their investment allows us to deliver the webinar program free of charge in 6 different languages. Inform Sport is a global certification program for supplements that batch tests products for substances prohibited in sport. As supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage all athletes and athlete support personnel to check all products before use at sport.wetestYoutrust.com. The ITA is proud to be recognised by UNESCO as a leading international organisation for the delivery of anti-doping programs. And this educational webinar is delivered with the support of the UNESCO International Convention Against Doping in Sport. Today's webinar is part 1 of our 2-part webinar mini-series in which we will look at the consequences of doping. These are delivered in collaboration with the University of Birmingham. Today, in part 1, we will focus on the impact on emotions. Part 2, which will be in March, will focus on the consequences of doping for others. These 2 webinars are adapted from the anti-doping education program developed by Professor Maria Cavassano and her team, which was funded by the International Olympic Committee. To take a look into the emotional impact of doping, I am joined today by 2 fantastic panelists. I would like to invite Phil and Goldie to turn on their cameras and offer them a warm welcome. Firstly, I would like to introduce Dr. Philip Hurst. So Phil is a senior lecturer in sport and exercise psychology at Canterbury Christchurch University. He competed as a middle distance runner for Great Britain and has worked as an anti-doping educator for UK Athletics since 2016. In 2018, he helped create, deliver, and evaluate anti-doping education interventions commissioned by both the World Anti-Doping Agency and the International Olympic Committee. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Nikki. Welcome, everybody. Looking forward to today's session.
Next, I would like to introduce Goldie Sayers. Goldie is a 3-time Olympian, Olympic bronze medalist, British record holder in the javelin, and an ITA education ambassador. Goldie is a passionate advocate for athlete education and empowerment through Olympic values. And she sat on the British Olympic Association Athletes Commission for many years. She was directly impacted by doping, having been awarded her Olympic bronze medal 11 years after the Beijing Games via the medal reallocation process. Goldie has a bachelor's degree in sport and exercise science and an MSc in sporting directorship. She now runs a successful property investment business and continues to mentor young athletes. Welcome to the webinar, Goldie.
Hello everyone, great to be here. Looking forward to a good discussion.
As mentioned earlier, we will leave some time at the end of the session for questions from you. So if you would like to ask Phil or Goldie anything related to today's topic, please use the Q&A box. So this webinar is designed to be very interactive. And so I do encourage you to participate via the chat box as much as you can during this webinar. But just a quick reminder of the values by which we conduct these webinars. We do expect all participants to always show fairness, respect, and integrity, so please make sure your contributions reflect these values. So now I will hand over to Phil to talk about what we will be covering in this session.
Brilliant. So in today's session, as Nikki alluded to, is based upon the intervention that Maria Cavassani delivered, and we're going to specifically focus on our achievements within sport and the emotions we would experience because of those achievements. Can you just quickly go back one more slide for me? Yeah, perfect. So looking at specific athletes in particular, we'll have Goldie who's going to discuss her own achievements and the emotions she experienced. We'll have in particular clean athlete examples, and then we're going to contrast that with those athletes who've used banned performance-enhancing substances and how they felt when they achieved something while under the influence of these substances. And then throughout, we'd like to reflect on your own personal experiences and choices and how you may have felt throughout that. So as Nikki did mention, it really is important that we engage as much as possible. So I do hope we get lots of conversations in the chat, which I can see going on right now. So I'm looking forward to it. Let's go on to our next slide. Okay.
Thanks, Phil. So as introduced by Phil, we will start by looking at achievements and emotions in sport. So again, just to reiterate, please join in the chat box and take this opportunity to think about yourself and the questions that we ask you and how you want to feel and who you want to be as an athlete. So the first question we have today for our participants to think about is your greatest achievement in sport. So please share what your greatest achievement is with us in the chat. And so this does not necessarily have to be a time that you won. It could be a time you overcame adversity or performed well against a tough opponent. And aware of our audience also has many athlete support personnel. So we would love to hear about your greatest achievements in sport too. So perhaps you have competed in sport at some level, or perhaps you have helped an athlete to achieve something great. So please take a moment to think and maybe in one sentence, tell us what your greatest achievement has been. And perhaps while we're waiting for some responses to come in, I will ask this question to Phil. So Phil, please share with us what your greatest achievement in sport has been.
Yes, so we're going back a few years now to 2015 when I was asked to represent Great Britain at the European Indoor Championships. That would probably be one of my greatest achievements within my sport. I don't know about you, Nikki. What would you say yours is?
Yeah, so mine is a bit of a story. So I feel like my greatest achievement was running this random 800-meter race on a grass track, and I didn't win. I didn't run particularly fast, but it was my first 800-meter race following tearing my Achilles just before the London 2012 Olympic Games, which meant I missed out on going. So my biggest achievement was overcoming quite a lot to be able to put spikes on and race again. So perhaps we'll just go to the chat because we have had a few contributions. So someone represented their country without any sponsors. So good for you. We know how expensive sport can be. We have someone else who is a finalist of the national championships, which is amazing. We have someone else who supported athletes through difficult safeguarding issues and ran a very fast half marathon. So two very important things to achieve in sport. I mean, definitely looking after athletes and their welfare should be a priority for everyone, but also you're a very fast runner. Also, we have a referee at the World Championships, and I think, someone worked at the Polyclinic in the Athlete Village in Rio, acting manager, standing on the podium in Asia, finishing a 25-kilometer open water competition. That sounds pretty crazy to me. But perhaps, Phil, given all of those amazing achievements that we've just heard about from our audience, I will now hand over to you for some follow-up questions.
I love this. Yes, some fantastic achievements here. And it might not just be in sport. You know, those of you who haven't answered may have other achievements which may be outside of sport, but I suppose we'll stick to the theme here. Are we going to the next question? Yeah, perfect. So thank you so much for those of you that have provided some answers. I think there's some amazing achievements here. While you have those in your mind, I want you to think about why it's your greatest achievement. So what was the process that took you to get to that? And, you know, Nikki, you mentioned for yours being on that grass track, the adversities that you have. Could you just tell me a little bit more about what was going on with that one?
Yeah, sure. So interestingly, no one else understood why I was so proud and so happy after this performance. Like, as I said, didn't win, didn't run particularly fast, but it was something that I guess was the end of a very long journey. And this long journey started when I tore my Achilles, and there were times over 2 years when I thought I may never run pain-free again, never mind race. So that was, I guess, part of my feelings and part of why I guess I was so proud and so happy at that moment.
Absolutely. So coming across over that injury, you know, is no mean feat. And funny enough, mine is very similar. The experience that I had the year before I was asked to, you know, compete for Great Britain, I had a terrible injury. I spent months rehabilitation in the gym, doing anything but running. So by the time you are able to come back and do what you love, and I was able to have that standard, it was just, it made me feel, yeah, really, really good, that sort of that adversity. So just seeing some of the responses from some people in here, I can see that Zafia, you know, trained hard. She made loads of friends. The family were proud and ran faster than I thought was possible. So I can imagine, Sophia, there's even more to that in terms of how much training you had to do to get there. Because I'd imagine that took quite a lot to get there. Luana had the same, you know, hard training and overcoming fear of swimming that long in the sea. I'm definitely terrified of the open water, so I can't imagine how that must have felt. So hard working, the overcoming your fear, absolutely, that must have been incredibly difficult to do. some other sort of comments coming in terms of their greatest achievements, which is really lovely to see. In terms of being the AFTU chairperson, Women Commission, I could imagine it took quite a lot to get there. So really good to hear. Do we want to move on to the next one?
Perhaps before we did, I just wanted to jump in, and I saw one comment about an 8-year dream that came true. And I really love that, because I think sport is all about dreams and all about what we can achieve. And it's amazing to hear when people do achieve their dreams. So thank you for sharing that with us.
I'm glad you've seen that, because 8 years, wow, that's a long time. So really good. So for your next question, for this question coming up, you have your greatest achievement. We kind of understand the process of getting there. Now, what I'd like to know and put into the chat box is, what did you feel? Why did you feel that way? What was it about the experiences that made you do that? And I don't know if you want to talk about yours, Nikki.
Yeah, sure. I think it was this whole piece of overcoming adversity, and we mentioned it. It was kind of alluded to or spoken about in the chat as a response to our last question about this idea of a dream. And it all starts with a dream, but the dream is not enough, right? Like there's a lot of hard work, there's a lot of effort that goes into achieving dreams, and whether that is standing on top of the podium, whether that's making a championships, whether that's running a personal best, it all starts somewhere. And so I think, for me, it was definitely this overcoming the adversity, and then achieving dreams. Phil, I kind of want to ask the same question to you.
Yes, so I mean, I felt so incredibly proud. I was so happy to be able to, represent my country. And I'd like other people as well in the chat box to put in how you felt. And because of that hard work of having to spend months in rehabilitation, going through the hard training, the boring, the monotonous training, day in, day out, that's what makes us feel so proud and so happy when we do achieve our achievements, our success. And I can imagine you felt the same, Nikki, when you had the 800 meters. What were the emotions that came to you?
Yeah, I think just happy. The dream was, the effort was worth it, right? The hours in the pool, the hours of rehab. And I'm also seeing some really great comments in the chat, which are worth or interesting to talk about. So we have someone who returned to sport after pregnancy and took their first individual medal at 30 years old. So, mum power right there. Also things like, because there was real proof that there's worth in believing an ultimate goal. So I love that as well. Phil, I don't know if you noticed any other comments that you'd like to address.
Yeah, so, Ruth saying she was the only African country competing in the event for the first time, to break down those types of barriers must be so important, incredibly proud. Zafira again mentioning how hard she had to race to make money for the charity in tribute to her mum. So there's some real personal examples here. And Ruta, saying, giving or providing a lot to athletes, as a referee, to have that possibility is, giving back to the sport as well. So I think there's some lovely examples here of the pride, the happiness, the hard work that everyone has been putting into here. It's incredible to see. You can go next slide. Yeah.
So Phil, I think, what would you like to highlight about what we've just talked about? What do you think about success and emotions? Perhaps you could talk a little bit about this, perhaps sum up some of the things that we've talked about and see how they fit in what's on the slide.
Yes. So essentially what we were trying to highlight was, we achieve these great successes in our sport and we often celebrate these successes. What goes on to allow us to achieve those successes is that hard work. And we feel so proud and happy because of the effort. Nikki, you mentioned about the adversity and coming over their injuries. There were some lovely examples that we've seen in the chat about people training hard, overcoming, sometimes for the first time, things that they had achieved. So because they were doing something that took so much hard work, that took so much effort, that is what makes us feel so happy and so proud. So when we think about our own success, our own achievements, it is due to our own effort, which we're in control of. You know, so it's how good we are, how talented we are. It's about the hard work that allows us to get there. And this is so important to the reasons that we feel these types of emotions, such as happiness and pride. So that's kind of the main message I wanted to give.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. So now perhaps we would like to welcome back Goldie, as I know we have some questions for her about her amazing successes. We mentioned a brief summary of them in her introduction, but I know, Phil, you have some questions for Goldie to find out a little bit more about her successes and the processes that went into achieving them.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So I'd imagine, Goldie, you have many achievements to pick from, but if you could just pick one achievement, could you just tell us what your greatest achievement is?
Oh, it's difficult, probably between two. I think both British records for me as performances were my greatest achievements. One was in the Olympic final in 2008, and the other one was 3 weeks prior to the 2012 Olympic Games. So for me, obviously, success is about the things that you can control. They were both brilliant performances, but obviously one was winning and one wasn't. But I had no control over that. But I knew that, you know, they were both kind of excellent performances on the day.
Really good. Could you tell us about how you felt about both achievements there? What were the emotions that you experienced?
I think for me, you know, success and the feelings associated with those performances, they both were obviously, I'd never thrown further in training or competition. For me, the sport, or throwing the javelin or athletics or Olympic sport, was always about seeing how good I could be at something. So, and especially in the javelin, if you've never thrown a javelin, it's very similar to, or I can only explain it by trying to hit a perfect golf drive off a 25-meter run up. So there's a lot of skill involved, and I love the feeling of, you know, giving every or 100% mentally and physically. You're kind of at one, which is you can't really do in any other arena, and you certainly can't combine those two things in work. So yeah, the feeling of flow, I think for me was a big one as well, and it's a very different or difficult feeling to replicate in other or any other arena.
No, absolutely. And were there any particular emotions that, you know, came to you as you know, the javelin lands? What goes through? What do you feel? Right.
I mean, elation. With javelin, it's completely I'm sure any sport, but with what you guys or Nikki and you feel when you're running, you are knackered. In the javelin, you're not knackered. It's a very anaerobic event. It's just the feeling of flow and sort of oneness and effortlessness. It's annoying because you think that you should try as hard as you possibly can, and I wish it was a sport like that, but you can only try for about 1800ths of a second. So it's elation, joy I think is probably the biggest emotion.
I think you're being modest, you know. I think that 18 seconds, no, I think the hard work, you know, as you say, to be so precise in getting to that stage. Could you just give us a little bit of a flavor in terms of what it was like to try and perfect your crafts? Because you say it's such a technical event. What did you do? How did you get to that level where, you know, being British record holder, there's a lot of women and who would love to be able to have that title, but you have that title. How did you get there?
I first picked up a javelin at 13 and went to my first Olympic Games, which was Athens, 8 years later. So I didn't get to be, I guess, probably top 5 or 6 in the world till I was 25. I mean, I feel very privileged that I was able to compete for or be in the running for Olympic medals. And, you know, my best performance was as a 29-year-old or 2 days before my 30th birthday. So it takes a lot of time to perfect this craft and this skill. And you know, if I talk about time, one javelin throw takes 4.5 seconds, or used to for me. And at the Olympic Games in the qualifying round, you get 3 attempts. So you'll have done, or I used to do, probably 5 or 6 hours of training a day, 6 days a week, maybe, you know, 49 weeks a year. So you'll have done in every Olympic cycle of 4 years about 7,000 hours of training for 3 attempts in an Olympic arena, which lasts 13.5 seconds. So I suppose that alludes to the fact that we're all crazy, but in a nice way. And so a lot of work, and it's, you know, it's a funny event in that you can't go out and throw javelins all day long. You know, most of the training isn't throwing a javelin. It's, you know, weightlifting, medicine ball throwing, sprinting, jumping, circuit work, a lot of work around injury prevention. It doesn't always stop you getting injured, for sure, but an immense amount of work. And it's not just from you as an individual, it's from coaches, support staff, and actually, you know, family and friends who have to put up with you being away a lot and missing lots of things. But it's especially with the Olympics, it's a lot of people's dreams. And that's what I love about the Olympic Games, especially, is that, you know, it gives joy to a lot of people, especially if they've inputted into it. So yeah, an immense amount of hard work. And when I look back at my career now, having retired, you know, it is crazy the amount of work that goes into it, but you have to love it. And you certainly have to, well, you can't love it all the time, but most of the time you're loving what you do. But it, you know, to look back, it is quite scary, the amount of work that goes into it, and also how much training you do for very little competition in Olympic sport as well.
Yeah, wow. I mean, 17 years essentially up until the London 2012 Olympics, over a decade for the 2008 Olympics of hard work to get there. So there's no, just to feel the elation, the joy, the happiness, there's no wonder, you know, those emotions protrude so much through that. So I'd say incredible story. I really love that. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Goldie, thank you for sharing your experience and sharing your successes and a little bit of the process of what goes into really a great achievement, or lots of great achievements. So now I would like to play a little bit of a devil's advocate and look at perhaps a different side to this of our emotions. So I would like to pose a question to everyone here, to Goldie and to Phil, and our participants today, about what we think might happen if success is achieved while doping, and how this might change our emotions or how we feel. So the first question, which I would love for our participants to respond to in the chat, would be, what emotions would be lost if we achieved success while doping? So Goldie, perhaps I could put this question to you. So you talked about the joy, you talked about the elation, you talked about this process that you went through to have these achievements. But what would you have lost? Like, what wouldn't you have experienced if, for example, you had doped during your career?
I think the biggest thing for me would be not truly knowing how good you were or are at a particular sport. And that's, for me, was always one of the drivers, was seeing how good I could be at something, and you'd never know. And I think, you know, many people potentially who've doped, I mean, who's saying that they couldn't have done equally well without doping? Because there's a lot of other areas of the sport that you can work on that aren't just physical. I mean, there's so much of it that's mental that I think not that many athletes really scratch the surface on, and potentially is equally powerful. But obviously it's, you know, potentially a big advantage to dope. But yeah, for me, it would just be an empty feeling, and potentially a lot of shame and guilt, I would imagine, or I'd hope. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a comment in the chat about you cannot be proud of what you would achieve. So you lose, the proud feeling when you stand on a podium or when you do really well. You just, as you said, you may feel slightly empty. Phil, I don't know if you want to add anything about what emotions you think would be lost if you doped during your greatest moments.
Yeah, you could just imagine, would you feel as happy? Would you be feeling as proud? I think about my dad always taking me to my training sessions and my competitions. How would I feel be able to speak to him knowing in the background, what I was doing? So you could imagine the emotions of happiness and pride to have at least be diminished. You might still be there, but they're definitely going to be reduced quite significantly. And I think in the comments you can see here, often I think Jayantha mentions, you'd feel that guilty. So I think probably that might lead on to the next question, Nikki.
Yeah.
Sorry for that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I think these are two sides of the same coin. So our next question was that what new experience maybe experienced, what new emotions would be experienced as success is achieved by doping. And I think we've got, as you said, a few comments about guilt, shame, there's no value in winning. So perhaps Goldie, you kind of alluded to it a little bit. Perhaps you could expand on, what would you felt if, for example, you had won your medal and you knew that you'd taken a shortcut? Like, how would you have felt in front of your family, for example?
I can't. It's difficult to imagine. I think it just wouldn't mean as much, and there would be no. I think you'd feel like a fraud. You might be able to say that, if I were to say that I was an Olympic medalist, yet know that I hadn't done the work and overcome the challenges that you inevitably have to in sport, it wouldn't mean as much. It would, and as I said, there's a lot of people who support you. It's an individual event. Yeah, you're part of a team, and it means a lot to a lot of people, and for them to, if they ever knew that you doped, it would be quite heartbreaking, I think, for so many people.
And just going back to the chat, because I think we've got some great comments in there. So someone said, fooled yourself. So, you're tricking yourself into something that's not real. We've got feeling ashamed. You'd be filled with guilt. It's just respectful to yourself. You lose your integrity, respect, pride. You feel guilty. Phil, perhaps I can come to you to talk about what you think. Look at some more things in the chat because they're really coming in fast.
No, absolutely. I love Felix's example, saying at first he'll be proud and then that proudness will be filled with guilt. And I think that really summarizes it up. You'll go, wow, I've just achieved something amazing. And then but wait, how did I achieve that? And that comes back down to the process and the reasons why we do things and the hard work and the training that we put in. That is what causes our happiness, our emotions when we achieve success. And if you have that cloud of, the cloud of doping in this instance, that's then just going to change those emotions. So you'll end up losing that happiness and that prideness, and then start to have these other emotions like guilt, regret, shame. There's a couple of examples coming in about, not being able to look people in the eye. And you could just imagine those types of emotions that people may experience. And I think it could be very, very negative in that sense.
Yeah, I also see things about like feeling isolation from the community. Like perhaps, if you dope, you're no longer part of, a group of athletes striving to be the best that they can be. And shamed and bad. And many, I guess, negative emotions would replace these positive ones.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think to summarize that, we can see the hard work, the effort is there, But when we achieve a goal or achieve something in sport, when there is doping, this can bring in these new emotions such as guilt, such as shame. We lose that value of that satisfaction and the pride and the happiness that comes with it.
Awesome. So now let's delve a little bit further into great achievements and doping. So let's hear from an athlete some of you may have heard of before, Tyler Hamilton. I would like to say a big thank you to Drug Free Sport New Zealand for allowing us to use this video in our webinar.
I was just a normal guy who loved sport, was a pretty good athlete, I thought, and, you know, knew how to suffer with the best of them, had a high pain threshold. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. You know, for me, it started with one little red egg-shaped capsule that a team doctor that I trusted handed me. The capsule contained testosterone, but he told me that it was for my health and that it wasn't doping. My gut told me otherwise, but I felt like I was doing the right thing, and you know, I felt like I had a bit of a pressure from the team to do this. That little testosterone pill led to, you know, much bigger things. But it starts with one small decision, and then before you know it, you know, you get involved and you cross that line onto the dark side, and just by a little bit, and then the next decision to do maybe a little bit more or something different is a little bit easier. And then you're covering it up with lies when your friends and family members are asking you about it. And you had two faces. One with the person everybody thought you were, and then another face with the person you knew you were. You know, that was, you know, a cheater, a doper. And, you know, leading a double life like that, you know, that catches up with you. You know, I had to lie to my family members for years. You know, my mother, my father, you know, straight to their face. You know, I worried more about getting caught than I did about winning, and that says something. I dreamed my whole life about winning a gold medal. I thought that was the coolest thing ever, to represent your country and to stand on the top step of the podium. When I finally did it and got the gold medal and was listening to the national anthem, yeah, it didn't feel remotely like it was supposed to. I had no idea how much it was just killing me from the inside out. It was eating me alive.
So Phil, perhaps we will go to you to talk a little bit about this video.
Yeah, I think Tyler's really portrays the consequences doping can have on your own feelings and emotions. So he talked about how it was like winning a gold medal, how he was more thinking about getting caught rather than about trying to be the best athlete that he could be. And, you know, it summarized it right up at the end there in terms of him handing back his gold medal. And just to throw that into the chat box there. So what I'd like to ask those questions is, why did Tyler hand his medal back? And he mentioned how he felt, but he didn't give any specific emotion. So could you identify what he would have felt doping, but then also handing back his medal? How did he feel and why did he do that? And I'll throw that question to you, Nikki, maybe while we look for some answers as well.
Yeah, sure. And I think it comes back to everything that we previously talked about as part of this webinar. You know, there was no pride, there's no happiness in taking a gold medal that perhaps you didn't, you didn't deserve. So I imagine that this is why he would have given it back, because he knew that he took a shortcut perhaps to get that medal.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, some of the comments in here saying couldn't cope with the pressure of keeping up with the lies. You imagine that would eat you inside out. You know, Tyler discusses this at length in his book, and he's very open about this. and mentioning there the clear conscience because he didn't deserve the medal, and he did so because he felt guilty. So Jayantha, if I'm pronouncing your name right, yeah, that's absolutely how you may feel. I don't know if you've seen anything else, Nikki.
Yeah, sure. So I've seen that someone thinks he probably felt remorseful. Someone is obviously, Anton is complimenting him, saying he's a real sportsman. He finally saw the value of fair play. He was cheated by his coach. Self-esteem disappears, and felt guilty. He felt remorseful, recognized that the medal didn't belong to him. So I think after the years of lies, he wished to be honest, and yeah, everything that we talked about: guilt, shame, empty feeling like he didn't deserve it, handed back the medal because he was guilty and wasn't proud, embarrassed, guilty of cheating. So I think that these same themes, these same emotions that we previously talked about are coming through in this situation, or what is Tyler Hamilton's story.
Absolutely. And I see Luana's mentioning, say, that deep guilt. Tyler discussed, as discussed previously, how deep down, he knew things that he's doing is wrong. And to do that over a career can be such a heavy burden to have on your shoulders. So imagine, if you didn't have to do that, be able to just be an athlete, work hard, think about the amazing moments without having these things going on in the background where you're constantly thinking, oh, I'm going to get caught. I hope I don't get caught. How does that feel when I win? Having that on in your heads, is going to really overcome the pride, the happiness that you'll feel. Did you want to go to the next slide? Perfect. So, you've just heard from Tyler there talking about his own experiences. What I'd like you to think about as well, or, if you have time to reflect on this after the session or during it, is just thinking about those amazing experiences that you told us in the chat box. Imagine that you were doped to get there, or you cheated in some way to get there. How would you have felt? Would you have felt the pride, the happiness, the joy? Goldie mentions the elation, those types of emotions. How do you think you would have feel? Would you have that? Or would there be a sense of guilt? Would there be a sense of regret? What may come into that? Yeah, there. Maybe leave that there to think about.
Yeah, and I think a couple of people have commented in the chat, they would have felt the same as Hamilton. They would have felt that it was very difficult to look in the mirror. So I think, we can see from what we've talked about in this webinar that perhaps taking a shortcut or doping to win, we may not feel how we should feel when we achieve something special or our greatest moment. Okay, so I think now we can move to the next slide, because although we've used Tyler as our athlete voice to explain some of these consequences of doping and his feelings, I think it is important to highlight that his experience and some of what he's described is felt by other athletes who have doped too. So for example, an interview with David Miller explained that when he won the Vuelta, he won by 1 second, and all he remembers was pure relief. There was no joy in that moment. So one of the biggest cycling tours in the world, and he won by a very close margin, and what should have been a moment of joy, it should have been pride, it was all just relief. And the second quote that we have comes from Dwayne Chambers' autobiography. And he said that the torment of injecting myself with EPO, HGH, and insulin, I felt saddened that I had lowered myself to doing it. I hated that I had to cheat to win. So those were just another few quotes from other athletes to show that Tyler's story is not an isolated experience. There tends to be common themes amongst athletes who have doped. So Before we summarize today's session and go to our Q&A, so just as a reminder, the Q&A is open, so please put any questions that you have for Phil and Goldie in there. I would like to play the final section of the video from Tyler.
And then when I finally came out and told the truth in front of a federal grand jury, which is crazy, it felt so good to tell the truth. It was, I knew from that point on it was where my life track was going to go from there. And just, it's about being open and honest. And hopefully that, that's a good lesson for the younger athletes. Like, do it the right way. And if you do it the right way and don't make it, that's all right. You can always look in the mirror and say, I did my best, and I did it clean. Hopefully, some of the mistakes that I make can help other people make the right choice, Even if you have made the wrong choice already, like, you can right the ship right now.
So a key take-home message from me is a quote from Tyler that relates to what we talked about today and his advice for the young athletes. But I think that it does apply to everyone in whatever role we do have in sport. And that is, do it the right way. And if you don't make it, then that's okay. Because you can always look in the mirror and say, I did my best. I did it clean. So with that, I would like to hand back over to Phil to summarize our session today.
Oh, really good. Such lovely examples I've been able to have today. And just to put that into perspective, we have our greatest achievements. We feel that pride, we feel the happiness because of the hard work, because of that process that we went through. Goldie talked about her experiences of getting to the Olympics, becoming the British record holder when she was 13 years old, over a decade to get there. So when we feel that pride, that happiness, it's because of that hard work that we had to do to get there. And importantly, with that hard work is the choice. You choose to do that, and that underpins everything that you do. And I think that really alluded back to what Tyler just said in that last video, is he decided to do everything. He wanted to have that choice to give back his gold medal, because that's how he wanted to feel. The great athletes that we had competing clean and proud, they're happy of their achievements because of that hard work. However, for those who dope, while they may have a sense of pride and happiness, they are experiencing a diminished version of that pride and happiness. And it also brings in new emotions like the guilt, the shame, regret. These things then become prominent in our day-to-day lives, or how Tyler mentioned it. That's what he was thinking about, rather than thinking about how proud and happy he was. You okay to the next slide? So yeah, as I alluded to, with that, the decision of your choice, as all athletes, you decide to compete clean, to do the hard work, to put in those hours of practice, as Goldie mentioned, every single day. And you can also choose the other path, to go on and to dope. That is in any athlete's decision-making ability. So as athletes, you have that choice. You can go down one route where you feel those positive emotions, or go down the other route where potentially you could feel the negative emotions that cloud every achievement that you may have.
And I would just perhaps like to jump in here and add another comment to this. And I think this applies to athlete support personnel and the people that, I guess, guide and lead and set the environment around the athlete. You have a choice too. You have a choice to, support an athlete to compete clean and do things the right way. Because we do know that although for some people doping may be a choice, there are a lot of factors and a lot of influences that potentially go into making this choice. So athlete support personnel, I think, that's where we're looking to you to look after the athletes, look after their health, look after their performances, so they can feel pride and joyful when they win something, and the same for you if you're supporting clean athletes and you have success, you're going to feel better about it. So that wraps up, I guess, the more formal part of today's webinar. So as you can see on your screen, we have linked some resources related to the content of this webinar that you may be interested in looking at after the session. Of course, we will send you the slides at the end of the webinar. So I would like to invite Goldie to turn back on her camera, and because we will now go to the Q&A. I see we have one question, so if anyone has any other questions, please pop them in the chat box. I see our first one, and I'll probably take this one because it refers to supplements. And the question is, although many players have been suspended due to food supplement contamination, these companies still produce supplements and contaminated ones, but the companies are not sued or closed down. So I guess my comment to that would be that supplements are not just for elite athletes or people who are subject to the anti-doping rules, they're for regular people as well. I guess we have covered supplements in some other monthly webinars that we've done previously. All these are available for you to rewatch on the IT and the Athlete Hub. But we always recommend, if you're an athlete who is going to use supplements, you do a comprehensive risk-benefit analysis and make sure that any supplement that you use has been batch tested to minimize your risk. And so perhaps going to the next question from Sophia. Sorry, here we go. The emotional considerations are really powerful. Do they resonate more with athletes compared to the threat of sanctions? Even dopers work hard and don't want their achievements to be completely undermined. So Phil, would you like to comment first, and then we'll go to Goldie?
Yeah, I was reading that question thinking, okay, I wonder what the most powerful way is to potentially prevent an athlete from doping, but I don't have an answer. I don't know if we know what is going to stop someone, deter someone from doping. It's a holistic approach, so we need to educate about the consequences, and I don't think a lot of athletes consider the internal consequences, not from a health perspective, more from an emotional perspective. I don't think many athletes will consider what impact that's going to have on them, but then you also have to have the threat as well of sanctions, so they come hand in hand. And that's how I would say the best way to do that is.
Goldie, have you got any comments on the question? Any thoughts?
It's difficult. I think you don't potentially, I think if you're thinking about the result the whole time and that, winning is going to be, I don't know, make you feel good or financially be of huge benefit, maybe the emotional consequences of doping wouldn't come into your thought process. But you are a long time retired, so I think being able to sit comfortably with any performance that you've given and the career that you've had, you're sort of longer retired than you are an athlete. It's quite a short career, so trying to think long term, I think would be beneficial. But yeah, as Phil said, I'm not sure many people who don't potentially think about the emotional impact that it may have, even if you're probably not caught, whether you're caught or not caught, potentially.
And I think that just alludes to what you mentioned, Nikki, in terms of the athlete support personnel being there to educate. So as Goldie mentioned, if they don't know about it, can physiotherapists, doctors, coaches, whoever you are, have that conversation, say this is what might happen if you go down that route, if those conversations are happening.
Great, thank you both. We now have a question. Phil, I might put this one to you from Jayantha. So please share if you have any research details related to emotional intelligence and sports. And they have provided an email address. So perhaps the best way forward for this is, Jayantha, if you would like to email us after the session, and we may be able to put you in touch with Phil, or Phil might have some ideas of perhaps who he could connect you with in terms of this kind of research?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you define emotional intelligence, but what we've shown through our research is that those who anticipate the negative emotions such as guilt are less likely to dope. So if we're able to highlight these are the consequences from an emotional perspective, athletes are able to anticipate that, and because of that anticipation, they then go, then I'm not going to dope. So there is maybe something there. So yeah, as Nikki mentioned, please email us, or I suppose we can email you to the paper.
Awesome, thank you. So our next question is from Massimo, who says, when will WADA add creatine to the banned substances list? Can the IPA start a petition? So I don't know, is my initial answer. I think this is probably a question for WADA and not really what we would get involved in or be able to respond to as part of this webinar. Our next question is from Dr. Douche, and it says, thank you for the wonderful webinar. I would like to ask about a new era of gene doping. How will it be discovered? I'm not sure that any of us in this webinar are experts on gene doping. Correct me if I'm wrong, Phil or Goldie, you've got some secret interests that I don't know about. But again, perhaps it would be appropriate for you to send us an email and we may be able to point you in a direction of some resources with more information about gene doping. I think we've got time for one more question from Claire. What are your thoughts on the emotional impact of those athletes who receive a sanction off the back of inadvertently ingesting a contaminated supplement rather than deliberate cheating? Phil, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, so there's I think there's no research that I'm aware of that's looked at those athletes who failed the drugs tests and ask them what their emotions are. But I think you could easily understand that they'd feel regret. They'd feel the shame about it. There's the recent cases in Britain with one athlete who had failed the drugs test, and the whole Olympic team had their medal removed. So there's definitely the regret and the shame that's associated with that. And that comes back down to an education. So these athletes need to check their supplements. So this webinar is sponsored by Informed Sport, and they are constantly told to be checking their supplements. So it comes back to the athlete in this instance for me to make the right choices, to understand the consequences of their decisions of using a supplement that does become contaminated, because then the emotions such as regret, shame are still present with these types of things.
Goldie, I don't know if you have any thoughts you would like to add.
Yeah, I think there would be, a high level of frustration as well with yourself and with the situation, because if it was inadvertent doping, but I think now, we're so many years in to, WADA and Informed Sport and all those avenues for being able to batch test supplements. The responsibility sadly does lie with the athlete. Well, not sadly, rightly relies on the athlete, and you are in charge of everything that you consume and everything you put in your mouth. So I think, whilst I feel for the athletes who can prove that it was a contaminated supplement, it is their responsibility. And I think those cases do highlight it for other athletes, or should highlight it for other athletes, that it's part of being a sports person now, is you must be in control and get any supplement you think you need to take batch tested. And also from a support personnel perspective, you can't rely on other people's opinions, or you can't blindly trust everybody, because the buck stops with you, and you're accountable as an athlete. You're the one that's going to be sanctioned potentially.
Okay, thank you both for your responses to the questions and across the Q&A. So that does put us on time. So we do need to wrap up now. But if you do have more questions, or if anything wasn't answered today, you can always reach us at education@ita.sport. So this does wrap up today's webinar. A big thank you to our panelists, Phil and Goldie, and of course, a big thank you to you, our audience, for your attention and your active participation. It's been great to hear about all your achievements. So for this session, in addition to the survey, which we would really appreciate you taking the time to fill out, the ITA and the University of Birmingham are working together to improve clean sport education. The university would like to conduct interviews with up to 15 people who have been in the session today to inform the improvement of content and the development of new activities. So if you are interested in participating in an interview, please email values.uob@gmail.com. So our next monthly webinar will be part 2 of our collaboration with the University of Birmingham on the consequences of doping. In part 2, we will focus on the effects on others. So please join Phil, myself, and 3-time Olympian and gold medalist Christine Gerard on the 28th of March. You can register for this webinar by using the QR code on the screen. And finally, if you would like to receive updates from the ITA, please sign up using the link you will find on the slide. Thank you all once again, and I wish everyone a great rest of your day.